Sat Hashem, today in Masechet Megilla, we're going to learn Yudalid Amud Aleph, 14a, and we're starting from Vayasar HaMelech et Tabato. Vayasar HaMelech Tabato is 2, 4, 6, about 9 lines from the top of the page. Vayasar HaMelech et Tabato is 9 lines down. Vayasar HaMelech et Tabato. So we're going to continue on with a story where Haman was essentially trying to buy the destruction of the Jewish people. That's where we left off with yesterday. We're going to discuss today, mostly of the day, we're going to discuss the Nevi'im throughout history. We'll start off with that because we're going to emphasize how the Nevi'im all were trying to get the Jews to do teshuvah. It's like almost all of Navi you read through and they're constantly telling them, do teshuvah, and we don't listen. But when Achashverosh takes off his signet ring to make a decree against the Jewish people, that is enough of a significant motivation to accomplish a tshuva movement that no Navi could accomplish. It's unbelievable. So with that, we'll go on to discuss who these Nevi'im were, specifically the Nevi'ot. Very interesting. Who were the female prophets throughout history? We'll go through stories. So let's see. It says after Haman gives his pitch, he wants to buy the Jewish people and destroy them. The king takes off his signet ring. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Gedola Asarat Tabat Yoter me'arba'im v'shmona nevi'im v'sheva nevi'ot. Greater was the removal of that signet ring than 48 nevi'im and 7 nevi'ot shenitnavu lehen Yisrael that prophesied for the Jewish people. Shekulam lo echzirum lemutav, because all of those prophets were not able to get the Jews to come back to good. Ve'ilu asarat tabat echziratan lemutav, and the removal of that ring, meaning the decree of Haman lashmid la'arog la'abed, caused the Jews to do teshuvah. Unfortunately, this seems to be a very common theme, which is until someone can come and give great musar, or the great rabbis could tell us certain things, we don't listen. Chas v'shalom, we need some sort of a smack until it reminds us, I gotta correct my ways. I guess human nature doesn't necessarily change. Now there is a Rashi over here, very interesting. He goes through at length to describe who were the 48 Nevi'im throughout history. Meaning there were many more than that, but there were 48 Nevi'im, which Rashi seems to learn, were those who prophesied, brought messages to the Jewish people, and were recorded throughout history. So he goes through the extensive list of it. Really what we're going to focus more on who the Nevi'ot were and what the sources in the Psukim were to show that they prophesied, the female prophets. So Tzana Rabbanan, says the Braita, 48 male prophets and 7 female prophets prophesied for the Jews. They did not add, or they did not detract or add onto anything that was written in the Torah. And this is a tremendous chidush. And this is really part of the anomaly, the uniqueness of Purim. This Purim is an entirely rabbinic holiday. Also Chanukah, by the way. Rashi throws in over here. Chutz Mikra Megillah. So Rashi says, 1 second, what do you mean the only thing that they added was Mikra Megillah? What about Chanukah? So he says, in the days of Chanukah, you didn't have Nevi'im anymore. But in the days of Mordechai, there were still Nevi'im. The last of the Nevi'im was Chagi Zechariah Malachi, and that was already the beginning of Bayit Sheni. So in the days of the Nevi'im, the only thing, or I guess the only significant addition, you can't say that they added onto the Torah, actually, because that would be a problem to say such a thing. But in some degree, the significant addition that they would have contributed was Mikra Megillah and nothing else. That's what it seems to be. My darush, meaning what did they expound that they said it's appropriate to add on Mikra Megillah? Means if you're going to require for future generations to keep Purim, to read the Megillah, they must have had good reason to add this mitzvah. You don't just add a new mitzvah d'Rabbanan. There has to be very important reason for that. So Amr Rabbi Chia bar Avin, Amr Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. They said like this. They said a Kal Vachomer. The Nevi'im at the time, Mordechai, Esther, all of the people who were prophets, they said the following: Uma me'avdut v'cherut amrinan shira. If by Yetziat Mitzrayim, when we went from servitude to freedom, and we said shira to Hashem, we said shira layam. Mimita l'chayim, so from death to life, meaning when there was a gzeira to totally destroy us, and we were saved. Lo kol shekain, certainly we should say Shira. Now, we don't actually say Shira, we read the Megillah. But the Megillah has an element of thanking Hashem, of singing praises to Hashem, and that's why it's appropriate to mitaken such a thing.
And it seems like that's why we don't say Hallel also.
Oh, asks the Gemara, Ihachi, famous question, good. If so, Hallel Nami Nema, why don't we say Hallel? We should say Hallel on Purim. The whole Kal Vachomer, to read the Megillah, is to give thanks to Hashem like Yetziat Mitzrayim. So then why don't we say Hallel? That's what Hallel is really supposed to be. So the Ihachi Hallel Nami Nema, why don't we say Hallel? So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, I believe that's what the Bach adds in here. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Lefi she'ein omrim Hallel anes shebechutz ha'aretz. Very interesting halacha. We don't say Hallel for a miracle that happened to us in chutz ha'aretz. Since the salvation from mimita l'chayim, albeit from death to life, but it happened in Persia, it happened outside of Israel, so we don't say Hallel on such a miraculous occurrence. What's the obvious question? When do we just say we say Hallel? On Pesach we say Hallel. Where did that miracle happen?
In Egypt.
Yetziat Mitzrayim, Zalayam in Yam Suf. That wasn't in Israel.
What's Rosh Chodesh also?
Okay, Rosh Chodesh is a different thing. It's true.
It's not in Israel, it's Rosh Chodesh.
Well, you could argue it is actually, because they sanctified the new moon. But I hear interesting. Asks the Gemara, Yetziat Mitzrayim Denes Shebechutz Ha'aretz. So what's the pshat that we say? They changed the girsa. Ve'amrinan Shira, they changed the girsa. Ve'amrinan Halelia, there's a girsa chain, I want to read it like I believe it's the Bach heads in. Ve'amrinan Halela, and we still say Halel even though the nes occurred in Chutz Ha'aretz by Yetziat Mitzrayim. So the Gemara answers, Kedetanya. No, the reason by Yetziat Mitzrayim we do that is, as the Braita illustrates, Ad shelo nechnesu Yisrael. Listen to the qualification of this rule. Before the Jews entered the land of Israel, so any land that a miracle happened in was appropriate to say Shira, to sing Hallel. But when we already entered the land of Israel, so beyond the point that we had entered Israel, any miracle that occurred in Chutz La'aretz would not be appropriate to say Shira. So to apply that, when the miracle occurred by Yetziat Mitzrayim, they had not yet entered the land of Israel. So the miracle that occurred outside is a fitting reason to say Hallel, which we do on Pesach. But after they had entered Israel and were kicked out, says Rabbi Yitzchak, it would appear to be not an appropriate time to say Shira for that miracle anymore, so we don't say Hallel on that miracle. Now, according to this answer, Rabbi Yitzchak, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, the reason we don't say Hallel on Purim is because it was a miracle that occurred in Chutz La'aretz. Right? Even though it sounds like, based on the Kal Vachomer, it would be a very fitting thing to do. Right. Because if Yetziat Mitzrayim, which was from Avdut L'Cherut, we say Shira, from servitude to being free, certainly we should say Shira, Mimita L'Chayim, when there was a Gezerah to destroy all of us, we should certainly say Hallel. We don't say Hallel because it was a Nes Shebechutz La'aretz. Fine. Rav Nachman says a second answer. I think maybe this is what you were saying before. Rav Nachman Amar, Kriyata zu Halela. The reading of the Megillah is Hallel. Meaning, the whole idea of Hallel is singing praises to Hashem. When we read the Megillah, we commemorate the miracle, and that's like saying Hallel. So you don't say Hallel because you're Yotzeh with Mikra Megillah. That's the point. Now, the Bach adds in here, Matkifla Rava. Rava asked the following question against Rav Nachman. He said like this, Mi Dami, could you compare them? Means the way that Rava actually is saying is, the question doesn't even start. So far we have two answers. First answer is you don't say Hallel for a miracle in Chutz La'aretz. That's Rav Yitzchak. Rav Nachman says that the Mikra Megillah is the Hallel. Comes along Rava, and Rava says, I don't even hear the question why you should say Hallel. Matkifla Rava, Mi Dami, I'm adding in words, the Bach adds in. Bishlamatam, in regards to Yetziat Mitzrayim, I understand why they said Hallel, Halu Avdei Hashem, because the servants of Hashem praise Hashem. Velo Avdei Paro. What are they saying essentially? Before we were servants of Paro, you took us out of servitude. Now that we're servants of Hashem, so we're going to sing praises to you. That is fitting to say Hallel, because we went from Avdei Paro to Avdei Hashem. Makes sense.
Freedom.
Full redemption. Elahacha, but over here regarding Persia, after the Purim story, it's true, by the way, we were saved from death. That's true. But Hallelu Avdei Hashem v'lo Avdei Achashverosh, could we really say that still? We were still in the Persian exile. We hadn't gone back to Israel yet. We weren't an autonomous nation, self-governing. We were still in servitude towards Achashverosh. It's true we were saved from the brink of disaster, but we were still in servitude. We were still avadim to Achashverosh. So we can't say in the Purim story the same type of Hallel like we would have said by Yetziat Mitzrayim. Akati avdei Achashverosh anan, we were still servants of Achashverosh. So what comes out is we have three answers why we don't say Hallel on Purim. Answer number one is Rav Yitzchak. He says because it was a nes shebechutz la'aretz. Rav Yitzchak. Rav Nachman says Megilla is the Hallel, and then Rava says the question doesn't even start because whereas in Yetziat Mitzrayim we could say Hallelu Avdei Hashem. Now we're Avdei Hashem. Before we were not Avdei. We were Avdei Paro, but we're still Avdei Achashverosh after the Purim story. So you can't say Hallel. Three answers. Now the Gemara analyzes.
Because the first one is you don't say Hallel if you're not in Eretz Yisrael
If the
yet.
miracle, after. If the miracle occurred after the Jews had gone to Israel and were kicked out after. If it happened before, they would, which is why Yetziat Mitzrayim,
Right,
they would.
right.
But once they went in and they were kicked out, now you don't say Hallel, Nes Shebechutz La'aretz, exactly. Says the Gemara, Bein l'Rava, Bein l'Rav Nachman, Kashya, but the question both on Rava and Rav Nachman is going to be, V'hatanya mishenechnesu la'aretz lo achshu kol ha'aratzot lomar shira. Question is, we stated above, it seems to be an agreed statement, that once they went into the land of Israel, all the other lands were not appropriate to say shira. But they're giving alternative reasons, which implies they don't agree with that. Because if they would agree with that, so then the reason you don't say Hallel in Chutz La'aretz is because you don't say Hallel for miracles that happened in Chutz La'aretz. The fact that they're giving other reasons seems to be they argue. So this would seem to challenge that above statement, which seems to be agreed upon. But the Gemara answers no. It's not necessarily that they disagree. Kivan shegalu chazru lachshiran harishon. So they say like this. It's true. The general rule would be if a miracle occurs outside of Israel, you don't say Hallel. And once they went into Israel, if a miracle occurred outside, you wouldn't say Hallel. But once they were exiled from Israel, so then Chutz La'aretz goes back to its original status. Just as before entering the land of Israel, if a miracle occurred for the Jews outside, you would say Hallel on that miracle. So says Rav and Rav Nachman, also when they were kicked out of the land of Israel, it's like it's a reset. So therefore, if a miracle happens outside, you should be able to say Hallel. Oh, but there's other reasons you can't say Hallel on Purim, which are of Nachman and Rava's reasons, either because the Megillah is like Hallel, or as Rav is saying, because they were still not freed essentially. They were still Avdei Achashverosh, and therefore they didn't say Hallel. But Rav and Rav Nachman wouldn't disagree necessarily altogether. Mm-hmm. Now the Gemara says like this. We had mentioned above that there were 48 Nevi'im, 48 Nevi'ot throughout history. Asks the Gemara V'tuleka, were there not more than that? What we're about to show is there were hundreds of Nevi'im. There were hundreds of prophets. So V'achtiv, we know it says in Shmuel Aleph, when it introduces us to the story of the Navi Shmuel, it says, Vayehi ish echad min Aramatayim. There was a man from Aramatayim, Tzofim, and the way we interpret that he was from, this is referring to Elkanah. Elkanah was the father of Shmuel. He was the husband of Penina and Chana. You know the story in the beginning of Shmuel. And it says he's from the place called Ramatayim Tzofim. So we expound his location as a reference to the time. And it teaches us, Echad mimatayim tzofim, tzofim means prophets. He was one of Ramatayim, is one of 200 prophets, shenet nav'u lahem le'Yisrael, who prophesies for the Jewish people. So you see, there were 200 prophets. How can you tell me there were only 48 or 55 total, including the women? So the Gemara answers, Me'avatu v'havu. It's true, there were many more prophets. Kidatani, like the Braita teaches. Harbe nevi'im amdu lahem le'Yisrael kiflayim kiyotze Mitzrayim. The Braita even adds that there were so many prophets, which was double the people that went out of Egypt. It means 1.2 million prophets could have prophesied for the Jewish people. But a prophecy that was required for future generations, meaning that we need to learn their stories and learn musar or messages from those generations, that was written down for posterity, for future's sake. But if it was not needed for future generations, it wasn't written down. So there could have been people who prophesied in those days, but we don't have recordings or it's necessary for us to know about them. It's only these 48 or 55 total were necessary for future generations. Bishmur Nachmani says another pshat in Ramatayim Tzofim, this place that Elkanah was from. Adam haba mishtei ramot. He was a person that came from two cliffs. That's what it could refer to, or mountaintops. Shetzofot zoed zo, that face towards each other. Meaning to say is that Ramatayim Tzofim is a reference to the location that he came from, the physical reality of it. Rabbi Chanan Amar, he says a third pshat, Adam haba mibnei Adam she'omdin berumo shel olam. Very interesting. This pshat is, he was a person who came from people who stood in the heights of the world. Umaninu, who is this referring to? Bnei Korach. This refers to the sons of Korach. It tells us in Tehillim, it says in Parashat Pinchas, we know when it refers to the people that had died in the desert, it says, Ubnei Korach lo metu. So it's true, Korach and his congregation died, but his sons didn't die. Now, what's the pshat? They didn't die. Tana mishum rabenu makom nitbatzer lahem begenom ve'amdu alav. The Chazal tell us that what happened was they were all falling down to Gehenom, and the sons of Korach did some sort of a teshuvah. They did some sort of a repentance. They said Moshe emet v'torato emet. They agreed to Moshe's leadership, and a place stretched out for them in Gehenom, and they were able to climb on and get out of there. So this Elkanah was Ramatayim Tzofim. He was a descendant of those children of Korach that actually survived. It happens to be that was part of Korach's mistake, because Korach was able to see prophetically that he was going to have great descendants like Shmuel Hanavi. So he thought to himself, if I'm going to have such great descendants, must be that I really am the Kohen Gadol. I'm going to survive this nisayon, this test. His mistake was that he was going to die, his sons would survive, and then they would be descendants of him through the sons. Exactly. That was the Meforshim bring down. Okay, now let's turn to the other side here for a second. We said there were these 48 Nevi'im. We said, fine, they were written down for posterity. We also said there were 7 Nevi'ot. There were 7 female prophets who prophesied. By the way, anybody who says that Judaism is chauvinistic or they don't trust and believe in equal rights or whatever, there were women's prophets also that existed. Because it's a pretty significant thing. Women prophets existed. It's true. Yeah, and we'll speak more about them now. Very interesting. We're going to go through and try to show what are the sources in the psukim that tell us, first of all, who are these 7 women that prophesied, and what's the sources for each one that they had nivu'ah, that they had prophecy. So let's go through these. Sheva Nevi'ot Maninu. Who were the 7 Nevi'ot, the 7 female prophets? Sarah, actually we know Sarah's nivu'ah was even greater than Avraham, Rashi tells us. Shema Bekola, because her nivu'ah was even greater. So Sarah, number 1. Miriam was the sister of Moshe, the daughter of Yocheved and Amram. Devorah was the Nevi'ah in her time. We'll speak about her. She used to sit under a palm tree. We'll get to that. That's why the Sefer is called Tomer Devorah. Chana is also one of the Nevi'ot. Avigail, we'll get to Abigail later. And then there was Chulda. Chulda, I think, is the least known of these prophets because it's the least used name. Chulda also means weasel, which is a little animal that crawls around. So that's, I think, why people don't like to use this name, although I've heard it used. The Esther, and the final one was Esther, which is in the Purim story. So let's go through each of these and show how we see that they were prophetesses, that they were Nevi'ot. Sarah, where do we find that she was a Nevi'ah? It says at the end of Parashat Noach, when it introduces us to Avram and Sarai at that point. It says, Avi Milka v'afi Iska. It says, Haran was the father of Milka, who was the wife of Nachor, and he was the father of Yiska. Now this Yiska, we know, is also Sarai. It's the same person. Amar Yitzchak Yiska zu Sarah. Yiska is actually Sarah. V'lama nekra shma Yiska. Why was she called Yiska? Yiska means to gaze or to see. Shesachta b'ruach hakodesh, because she saw with ruach hakodesh. It means to gaze. So Sarai had prophecy. Where do we find she had prophecy? Shneimar Parashat Vayera, it says, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah, shma bekola. Hashem said, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her voice. Why? Because she knows what she's talking about. Why? Because she has prophecy. An alternative explanation of Yiska. Yiska shakol sochin biyofya. It means to gaze. Everybody used to gaze at her beauty because Sarai was so beautiful that everybody gazed at her beauty. So we've shown Sarai was a Nevi'ah. Let's move on. Miriam. Where do we find that Miriam was a Nevi'ah? In Parashat Bishalach, it tells us Vatikach, this is after the miracle alayam, the Jews cross over, and it says the men sang Shira, and then it says Miriam led the women in singing Shira. So what does the pasuk say? It says Vatikach Miriam anviya achot Aaron. Miriam, the sister of Aaron, took the drums and started to sing Shira with the Jewish people. Now why does it say she was the sister of Aaron? She was also the sister of Moshe. So velo achot Moshe, was she only the sister not of Aaron, not the sister of Moshe? What happened was like this. She originally prophesied when she was only the sister of Aaron, and she said, in the future, my mother is going to have a child who will save the Jewish people, which means she's called the sister of Aaron because Aaron was the older son. Aaron was 3 years older than Moshe. So what happened was, before Moshe was born, she prophesied that her mother would have another son after Amram remarried her, and she would bear a child called Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why it says the sister of Aaron. It's to emphasize the fact that she predicted Moshe before Moshe was actually born. And when Moshe was born, the whole house became filled with light. A miraculous thing. So her father Amram got up and kissed her on her head. Marley said, your prophecy is becoming fulfilled. But when Moshe was thrown into the river 3 months later, her father Amram got up and hit her on her head. He said, what happened to your prophecy? What happened to your prophecy? You predicted something good and this is not working out exactly. And that's what it means when it says in Parashat, you're fired. It says in Parashat Shemot, it says in the pasuk, Miriam stood from afar to see. She wanted to know what's going to happen. Why did she stand to watch by the river? She had faith that her prophecy wasn't false. She wanted to know what's going to happen. So she watched, and Tachlis, what ended up happening? Bitya takes him out, she runs over, and the story is what it is. Good. So we know she had prophecy. Devorah. Now this is in Sefer Shoftim. Devorah was a prophetess also. The pasuk tells us in Shoftim, Vidvorah isha neviah. It says clearly she was a prophetess, a woman neviah. Eshet Lapidot, the wife of Lapidot. Now, literally you'd say it means her husband's name was Lapidot, but the Gemara understands, actually that was not her husband, but Lapidot is a reference to what she used to do. My Eshet Lapidot, Shaita osa ptilot lamikdash. She used to make wicks for the Beit HaMikdash. Very interesting. It seems to be like not necessarily such a significant thing, but she used to twist the wicks for the menorah and the Beit HaMikdash. She would actually make them. That's a side point though. HaMikdash. Now the pasuk tells us in Shoftim regarding this Devorah, V'hi yoshevet tachat tomer. She used to sit under a palm tree, a date palm. Why did she sit under that? I mean, she used to sit there and people would come to discuss with her. You see, her amazing thing is that she was an extremely knowledgeable woman and she would counsel people, tell them the halacha. She would guide them like a shofet used to do. She was a shofetet. She was a neviah. So why did she specifically sit under that? So Amar Shimon ben Avshalom, very interesting. Some on the side changed the guy's name here, not to Avshalom, but Avishalom, because we know you're not allowed to name after Rishaim. And Avshalom in history was a Rasha. He was the son of David who rebelled against him. So they say this Amorah's name could not have been Avshalom, it must have been Avishalom, a different name. So it's interesting. Today in Israel you have people that are named Nimrod. It's not necessarily appropriate. Right. Amar Rabbi Shimon Avshalom. Why did she sit under a date palm? Mishum yichud. So the first pshat is because of yichud. The date palm has these wide, spread out branches, so there wouldn't be a situation that encloses her with a man who came to consult with her, meaning she was visible. There wasn't a seclusion that would occur. Davar acher, an alternative pshat. Matamar ze eno ela lev echad. Just as the date palm has one heart, Rashi learns that the sap of the tree sits in the center of the tree. Other trees, apparently the sap goes to the branches as well. But the sap of the date palm sits in its trunk. It sits in the trunk of the tree in one place. Af Yisrael shebeoto ador lo haya lehem ela lev echad la'avian sheba shamayim. So too, as a symbolism, the Jews in that generation also only had one focus, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what that symbolism here was. Yeah. 1 second. Now, that was the proof that Dvorah was a Nevi'ah. It says clearly. Chana, how do we know she was a prophetess? It says in Shmuel, Chana was the mother of Shmuel HaNavi. So it says in Sefer Shmuel, what happened was every year, Elkanah would take his wives to the Mishkan Shiloh, and every year Chana would feel sad because she didn't have any children. Penina had children. So one year it says she went to daven, and it says, Vatitpalel Chana vatomer. Chana prayed and she said the following. She said, Alatz libi, my heart is exalted by Hashem. This is after the story. I made a mistake. This is later, I believe. This is, 1 second. Yeah, this is after she had Shmuel, and she comes back to the Mishkan after to praise Hashem and thank Him for having Shmuel. So it says, Alatz libi ba Hashem, my heart is exalted with Hashem. Rama karni ba Hashem, my Karen, my glory is elevated with Hashem. Rama karni velo Rama pachi. So the Gemara says she was prophetically predicting the future reality. That she specifically said, Rama karni. Now, karni could be my glory, but also Karen is a horn, or it's a tool that they used to contain oil with, that they would anoint new kings into service. And she said, Rama karni. The kings who will be appointed through the Keren, through the horn, will be long-lasting. Velo Rama pachi, but not the kings that will be appointed with the earthenware vessel. What is this referring to? David v'Shlomo shenimshechu bekeren. David and Shlomo, who would be appointed with the oil, Keren, the horn of oil, nimshecha malchutan. Their malchuyot, their kingdoms would continue. Shaul v'Yehu shenimshechu bepach. But Shaul and Yehu, his son, who would be anointed with this earthenware vessel, lo nimshechu malchutan. Their kingdoms would not continue. The point is, she was able to prophetically predict the future reality of kings. She was a prophetess. Now we're just going to continue on those psukim now because we quoted them. She says, Ein kadosh ka Hashem, there's no one holy like Hashem, ki ein biltecha, because there's no one but you. So Amr Rav Yehuda bar Menashe, al tikri biltecha. Don't read it biltecha, means no one but you. El lavlotecha. Lavlotecha means you wear them out. What does that mean? Shelo kemidat hakadosh baruch hu midat basav adam. Man is not like Hashem. Midat basav adam ma'aseh adam mivalin oto. When it comes to people, right, so you have a great architect or a great builder, and he builds this fantastic tower. His handiwork outlives him. Because you could build a tower which lasts for 200 years, but the thing you built in this world will naturally outlive you then. But Hashem outlasts, lavlotecha. He outlasts anything that He created, because Hashem is forever, obviously, and everything else is temporal. There is no rock like our God. What is Ein Sur? So the word Sur can mean rock, but if you change the nekudot, Sayar, it can mean an artist. So Ein Sayar Ke Elokeinu, there is no artist like Hashem. What does that mean? Adam tzar tzur al gabe hakotel, when a person carves an image or makes a picture on the wall, ve'eno yachol la'atil ba ruach neshama krevayim ubnei me'ayim. He can't put into it in insides, intestines, and life. But Hashem, He puts a picture within a picture, which means He makes a woman pregnant. So He creates the woman. He creates the child inside of the woman. And then He gives it life and insides and all of that. You know, we're trying to do with AI and with robots and all of that. We think we're so sophisticated. Hashem created people with the ability to have people inside people, which is an incredible thing. Something that I think ultimately we cannot replicate. The Gemara seems to be saying, I don't know, AI, robots, it's not life. And it seems it's not life, tachlis. Abigail, says the Gemara, how do we know Abigail was a prophetess? Here we have a story in Shmuel Aleph. It's a very interesting story. We have a story as follows. We know David HaMelech was appointed to be the king, the next king, by Shmuel HaNavi. But at the time, Shaul HaMelech was the serving king. Shaul did not appreciate this because it was a threat to his kingdom. He was not happy about this. So in Shmuel Aleph, we find many times Shaul tries to kill David HaMelech. We find this, even though, by the way, he was his son-in-law. But we have one story where David, who essentially has to run away and escape, is traveling through the desert, and he's traveling by a location of a fellow whose name is Naval. You know what, I think maybe we'll stop here. I don't want to go too far ahead because this really takes us to the next time. You know what, we'll stop here. We'll stop with Abigail. We'll pick up tomorrow with Abigail. We'll pick up with her story and from the bottom of Yadalat Amud Aleph.
Have a beautiful day.
Yom Tov.